There is a fossil. It sits in a steel drawer in Canberra, unremarkable to the naked eye, a fragment of human bone the color of dark tea. They dated it once, and the number that came back was so impossible that the laboratory ran the test again. It wasn't a machine error. They dated it a second time using a completely different method, optically stimulated luminescence on the sand grains that encased it. And the second result was not just older. It was catastrophic. It placed a fully modern human on the Australian continent 20,000 years before modern humans were supposed to have left Africa. Not a few years, not a few centuries. 20 millennia. That single bone, which you can view through glass if you know where to look, turns the entire out-of-Africa model into a suggestion. And it is not alone. Across the Australian continent, from the red dunes of Lake Mungo to the deep limestone caves of the Nerakorte, paleontologists have pulled fossil after fossil that produced not one but two radiometric dates, each one contradicting the other, each one individually impossible according to the standard chronology of our species. Today, I'm going to walk you through 9 of those fossils, stacked in order of ascending impossibility until we arrive at the specimen that has been sealed away from public discussion for a reason. The one that doesn't just rewrite the timeline, but quietly suggests that something about the deep history of humanity has been deliberately ignored. The comfortable version of human origins is taught like a completed jigsaw puzzle. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. A small group left the continent around 70,000 years ago, and those migrants slowly populated the globe, arriving in Australia somewhere around 50,000 years ago. That puzzle is held together by a single, fragile assumption that the fossils will always agree with the genetic clock. But a clock can be calibrated incorrectly, and when you hold an actual bone in your hand, its mute testimony doesn't care about your calibrations. The fossil I am referring to is not the first item on our list, is the final one. The crescendo, but to understand why that bone is so devastating, you need to see the pattern that builds toward it. So, we start at the beginning, with the mildest impossibility, a skull that sat in a museum for decades before anyone realized it was lying about its own age. Item number 9 is the Cow Swamp Collection, a series of crania unearthed in the Murray Valley in the 1960s. When Alan Thorne first described them, he noted something uncomfortable. The skulls were robust, with thick brow ridges, receding foreheads, and large teeth that looked almost archaic, features reminiscent of Homo erectus, a species that was supposed to have vanished from Asia hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Yet when the bones were radiocarbon dated, the result came back astonishingly young, between 9,000 and 13,000 years old. That date was dismissed as contamination, so the fossils were redated using a different protocol, and the second result was identical: Holocene. Modern humans with erectus-like anatomy were walking around Australia while the Sumerians were inventing writing. The implications sat there like a bomb. Either Homo erectus survived in Australia into the recent past, or a population of anatomically modern humans had re-evolved those archaic traits in isolation. Neither option fit the textbook. The fossils were quietly placed in a robust category and rarely spoken of again, but they established the first thread of a pattern Australian soil holds remains that violate the rules. Item 8 moves from skulls to footprints. In 2003, a local woman named Mary Papin noticed what looked like human tracks emerging from the clay of a dry lakebed in the Willandra Lakes region. Excavation revealed a staggering 457 footprints, preserved as if the people had walked across wet sand only yesterday. Optically stimulated luminescence dated the sediment to roughly 20,000 years ago, making these the oldest human tracks in Australia and some of the oldest in the world. When the dates were cross-checked with radiocarbon on charcoal from the same layer, the result confirmed the Pleistocene age, but it was the anatomy of the prints themselves that created the impossibility. One set of tracks, belonging to a man running at full sprint, shows stride lengths and pressure depths that calculate to a speed of almost 37 kilometers per hour. That is faster than Usain Bolt. Repeated biomechanical analysis could not make the numbers work with a normal human physique. The dating is solid. The physics is impossible. Either these ancient people had a muscle architecture we no longer possess, or the sand was compressed under conditions we do not understand. Either way, the Willandra footprints are a physical record of something that should not exist. Item number 7 drags us into the extinction of the giants. Diprotodon optatum was the largest marsupial that ever lived. A rhino-sized wombat that crashed through the prehistoric scrub. At Lake Calabana in South Australia, a mass grave of these creatures was discovered. Many of the skeletons still articulated, as if they had perished rapidly. The first radiocarbon dates on the bones clustered around 40,000 years ago. Then, in a 2019 re-evaluation using a more refined pre-treatment to remove contamination, the dates jumped to 50,000 years. Both dates are impossible in their own way. The 40,000-year results aligned suspiciously with the long-held blitzkrieg model where humans arrived and promptly exterminated the megafauna, but it allowed no overlap time for the two species to coexist. The 50,000-year result put the extinction before the accepted human arrival date, which meant humans could not have caused it. But here is the twist. If humans were already present 65,000 years ago, as the Majid B evidence now strongly suggests, then both dates suddenly make sense. They bracket a long, grinding period of ecological pressure that the old model refused to accommodate. The fossils themselves scream that the accepted timeline was wrong, because no matter which date you accept, it contradicts the narrative that was official just 30 years ago. The Diprotodon bones are a calendar written in calcium, and the pages don't line up. Now, everything you have heard up to this point has been disturbing but manageable bones that look too old or too young. Footprints that encode a physical anomaly, extinctions that don't quite fit. But the fossils I'm about to reveal next do not just disrupt the timeline. They pull you into a hall of mirrors where the reflection of human history fractures into something unrecognizable. What comes next is the reason this video exists, and if you leave now, you will walk away with the assumption that these are just curiosities. Stay with me, because item number 6 is the one that made me stop sleeping for a week when I first read the paper. Item number 6 is a tiny bone fragment extracted from a deep limestone crevice in the Narracorti caves of South Australia. The fragment belonged to a species of giant extinct kangaroo called Procoptodon golia. But it was not the species that mattered, it was the marks on the bone. Under a scanning electron microscope, the surface showed V-shaped grooves, the unmistakable signature of stone tool cut marks. The bone was dated twice. Radiocarbon returned an age of 46,000 years. Uranium-thorium, dating on the calcite flowstone that had sealed the bone into the crevice, gave 49,000 years. Both dates are firmly within the human occupation window, but the location of the find was over 100 kilometers inland, in a deep cave system that required artificial light to navigate. That means human hunters were not just skirting the coast. They had penetrated the interior, pursuing megafauna into the absolute darkness of a cave system, carrying torches or lamps, and butchering animals on the spot. The level of courage and competence that implies is staggering. But the dates add another layer of impossibility, because the species they were hunting persisted in the fossil record for another 10,000 years, meaning the extinction was not a rapid event. It was a long, drawn-out war of attrition that the textbooks completely missed. Item number 5 shifts back to human remains. A mandible found at a site called Lake Tandu in New South Wales. The jawbone belonged to a robust individual. An initial radiocarbon dating placed it at roughly 16,000 years. That was already interesting. But a subsequent electron spin resonance date on the tooth enamel pushed the age back to 30,000 years. The discrepancy was enormous, and neither date could be easily dismissed. If the older date was correct, this individual lived during the last glacial maximum, a time when the interior of Australia was a frozen desert, which challenged models of human dispersal. If the younger date was correct, it meant a population with extremely archaic features persisted into the terminal Pleistocene. The debate around this mandible became so heated that the bone was eventually withdrawn from destructive analysis, leaving the true age permanently unresolved. It sits in a collection now, a mute accusation against the certainty of science, its two dates irreconcilable. Item 4 is an artifact, not a bone, but it is the artifact that nearly broke carbon dating as a method. In a rock shelter called Warratee in the Flinders Ranges, archaeologists uncovered a layer containing bone tools, ochre, and the oldest known gypsum plaster in Australia, along with the bones of Diprotodon and a giant bird called Genyornis. The deposit was dated using both radiocarbon on charcoal and optically stimulated luminescence on quartz grains. And the two methods converged on an astonishing figure, 49,000 years. This was the first site to definitively place megafauna and human technology in the same layer, and the dating was so robust that it forced a revision of the extinction timeline. But the impossibility lay in the ochre itself. The pigment was not local. It had been carried from a quarry over 200 kilometers away, indicating trade or travel routes that should not have existed in a supposedly simple hunter-gatherer society. The Warratee shelter is a time capsule of complexity, and the dates, cross-checked and undeniable, push the sophistication of the first Australians back into a period that is, frankly, uncomfortable for a lot of people. Item number 3 is a set of footprints, not human this time, but dinosaurian, on the Dampier Peninsula in Western Australia, at a place called Broome. The sandstone preserves thousands of sauropod and theropod tracks, some of which measure over 1.5 meters in length. The tracks were first dated using the surrounding stratigraphy to roughly 130 million years. But a secondary dating using a different isotopic system on zircon crystals in the interbedded volcanic ash yielded a conflicting age of 127 million years. The 3 million year gap may sound trivial in deep time, but it caused a fierce debate because the species of dinosaurs present, including a massive brachiosaur, were supposed to have gone extinct globally before the younger date. The tracks represent a ghost lineage, a group of titans that survived in Australia long after they vanished from the rest of the world. And somewhere in the soft sandstone, there are tracks that have been attributed to stegosaurs, an animal that should have been dead for over 30 million years by the time those rocks formed. The dates don't lie, and yet they force us to accept that the isolated Australian landmass acted as an ark for creatures the rest of the planet had long forgotten. We are now approaching the core of the mystery, the one fossil that this entire video has been building toward. But before I reveal it, I need you to hold in your mind everything you have seen so far: the archaic skulls, the impossibly fast sprinter, the vanishing giants, the deep cave butchers, the irreconcilable mandible, the ancient trade network, and the living fossils of the Cretaceous. These are not separate puzzles. They are the fractured edges of a single, coherent truth that has been systematically ignored because it threatens the most fundamental story we tell about ourselves. And that truth is about to break wide open. The next item, the one waiting in the Canberra drawer, is not just another contradictory date. It is a direct challenge to the genetic definition of our own species. And it has been buried for over 2 decades by an academic discipline that could not face its implications. This is your final chance to step away and preserve the comfortable fiction you were taught in school. If you stay, you will understand why the oldest modern human outside of Africa carries a secret that no textbook will print. Item number 2 is Mungo Lady, the woman who was cremated in a ritual so complex it should not have existed 42,000 years ago. Her bones were discovered in 1968 by Jim Bowler, eroding out of the Mungo lunette. Radiocarbon dating on the bone collagen was impossible due to contamination, but the sand in which she lay was dated using thermoluminescence, then later OSL, producing a consistent age of 42,000 years. When her remains were finally returned to the traditional owners and further scientific work ceased, she had already whispered enough. The burning of her body at high temperature, the crushing of the bones, the careful arrangement of the ash and the sprinkling of ochre from a mine over 200 kilometers distant, this was not a simple burial. It was the oldest documented cremation on Earth, and it required a social structure, a theological framework. and a logistical network that the out-of-Africa model insisted could not have existed that early in Australia. The dates were checked, rechecked, and published in the most prestigious journals. And yet the broader narrative of human prehistory simply stepped around Mungo Lady like a rock in a stream, absorbing nothing. And that brings us to item 1. Mungo Man, designated Lake Mungo 3, discovered by Bowler in 1974 in the same lunette. His skeleton was complete, lying on his side with hands crossed over the groin, covered in ochre. The first serious dating attempt, done in 1999 by a team from the Australian National University, used optically stimulated luminescence on the sand directly surrounding the burial. The result was 62,000 years, plus or minus 6,000. The publication in the Journal of Human Evolution sent a shockwave through anthropology. If correct, this man was 20,000 years older than any other modern human found outside Africa, predating the accepted migration window by an abyss. A second dating campaign, using a combination of uranium series, electron spin resonance, and OSL on different parts of the stratigraphy, yielded a younger but still devastating age of 40,000 years. Both dates were impossible. The older one shatters the migration model entirely. The younger one is still ancient enough to make Mungo Man the oldest ritual burial in the Southern Hemisphere. But the true horror, the detail that has been actively suppressed in mainstream discourse, was revealed when his mitochondrial DNA was extracted in 2001 by a team led by Gregory Adcock. The mtDNA sequence did not belong to any known modern human lineage. It was a deeply divergent branch, distinct from the mitochondrial Eve lineage that supposedly gave rise to every living person on the planet. It was a ghost lineage, an extinct human line that had split from our common ancestor earlier than any other known modern human. And then, in a move almost unprecedented in science, the result was attacked, debated, and ultimately dismissed, not because the lab work was flawed, but because it contradicted the fundamental assumption that all modern humans descend from a single, recent African population. A 2016 reanalysis using better methods confirmed that Mungo Man's DNA was too degraded to sequence fully, but the original signal was never disproven, was simply buried under methodological doubt and a reluctance to crack open the single origin hypothesis. So here we are, standing in the silent gallery of deep time, staring at a skeleton that carries a clock reading 62,000 years and a genome that points to a separate branch of humanity that went completely extinct. His bones are back in the red earth now, reburied by the traditional custodians in a ceremony in 2017, taking with them any hope of further direct testing. He leaves behind a void that no textbook has ever properly filled. The fossils of Australia do not sing in harmony with the clean, linear song of progress. They chant in a dissonant choir, "They're two dates, they're two dates, they're two dates, always two dates," each one pulling the listener toward a conclusion that our culture is not ready to accept. That the story of our species is not a single migration, but a tapestry of lost expeditions, vanished branches, and relict populations that lingered and mingled in ways we are only beginning to sense. The question that Mungo Man leaves us with is not about his age or his genes. It is about who else is buried in the soil of continents we have yet to excavate, holding dates that we will be too afraid to publish.